All right, hello 12s, welcome again. We are talking in this video about the lower digestive tract. So if you remember last time we talked about the upper digestive tract, we talked about saliva, how it's water, salivary amylase, starches got digested here, peristalsis down the esophagus, the cardiac sphincter into the stomach, where we had mechanical digestion here, chemical digestion of starch, mechanical digestion of food, and chemical digestion of proteins. Also, we talked about the pepsin, that's the protease, the enzyme that digests proteins here in the stomach. Stomach is acidic. And stomach stores food. And where we left off last, we left off at the pyloric sphincter. That's the sphincter at the bottom of the stomach that is closed and is preventing acid chyme, which is what has happened to the food that we've eaten. It has now been turned into acid chyme from entering further into the now small intestine. Let's talk about acid chyme. What's in acid chyme? So acid chyme is going to be full of water, hydrochloric acid, and some digested starch. So we're going to be seeing some polysaccharides, maybe some disaccharides, some saccharides from the digestion up here. And also we're going to be seeing some peptide chains, maybe some amino acids, but the breakdown of proteins has begun. It's going to have a low pH. And you're going to see not broken down fats, not broken down nucleic acids. Those are still in there waiting to be digested as we now enter the small intestine. So the pyloric sphincter only lets in a small amount of the acid chyme into the small intestine. The small intestine isn't designed for acidic environment. It doesn't want to be acid. So only a little bit of the acid chyme lets in. Remember, the stomach can store food. One of the functions of the stomach is to store food. So it's storing all of that food, and only a little bit enters the small intestine. Now, when it enters via the pyloric sphincter, the small intestine, it's still acid chyme, and it is acidic. The small intestine has chemoreceptors. Chemo are chemical receptors in the first part of the small intestine. The first part of the small intestine has a unique name. It's called the duodenum. I've also heard it called the duodenum. I really like calling it the duodenum, but I always hear it called the duodenum, so let's just call it the duodenum. And maybe just in our class we'll call it the duodenum. And so this, the duodenum has chemoreceptors. Remember, the stomach knew that there was food in the stomach because it had stretch receptors, mechanical receptors that detected the stretching. Here we have chemoreceptors that detect the chemistry. And what these chemoreceptors are detecting is the low pH of acid chyme, the acidity of acid chyme is what these chemoreceptors are detecting. And so then these chemoreceptors detect this acidity, and they trigger endocrine glands to release these endocrine glands here in the duodenum to release two hormones. Remember, endocrine glands release hormones into the blood called CCK and secretin. These are these two hormones. And these two hormones, they enter the circulatory system and they travel through the circulatory system and they head for an organ called the pancreas. Now, we don't have the pancreas. We see the pancreas is here. It's very large. I don't know, can you see it? It looks like those salivary glands, but it is a glandular organ. There's the pancreas. It looks like a leaf. It sits next to the duodenum. There's the duodenum. That's part of the small intestine. It sits next there. And the pancreas is both an exocrine gland and an endocrine gland. It has endocrine gland tissue and exocrine gland tissue. Now, we've got those chemoreceptors, CCK and secretin have been released. Not only do CCK and secretin target the pancreas, they also target the gallbladder. The gallbladder is a exocrine gland, and it sits at the base of the liver. It sits at the bottom of the liver. There's the liver, but it's kind of underneath the liver. It's part of the liver. And there's its duct. Look, it's an exocrine gland because it has a duct. There's the duct, and the duct leads to the duodenum. And the gallbladder stores something called bile. And so CCK is the thing that triggers the gallbladder to release bile. CCK and secretin trigger the pancreas. There's the pancreas to release pancreatic juice. These go into the duodenum, and stuff happens, which in a moment I'll talk. Also, CCK and secretin trigger the pancreas to its endocrine glands to shoot out insulin into the blood. So let's break all of those down. Let's start with bile. Let's talk about the gallbladder. So I'm going to grab a liver here for you. So here's our dude. He's not been very useful. Mainly because of that, because he's very rigid and he falls apart. And he's missing a whole ton of stuff. Not the best. But anyways, you saw the liver. The liver sits over here. It's a large organ. Where is it? There it is. It's a very large organ. And the liver is related to a whole bunch of stuff, but it's related to digestion. What the liver does is the liver breaks down red blood cells. So it's got a bunch of roles. So let's talk about the roles of the liver here. So number one, the liver breaks down red blood cells, and from those red blood cells, it extracts two pigments called bilirubin and biliverdin. They sound like some kind of Scottish or Irish boys that you would beat up. Bilirubin and biliverdin, and this is a green pigment. So there's the bile. There's the gallbladder there attached to the liver, and so that pigment is added to bile. The liver also produces bile, so it breaks down red blood cells and produces bile, and then that pigment mixes with bile, and that's what gives it the green color. That's why bile looks green. Sometimes when you puke, it looks green. It's green because of the bile. And what bile? So that's one of the roles of the liver. Let's talk about more of the roles of the liver, and we'll get back to bile. So the liver does that. So it breaks down red blood cells, produces bile, which is used directly in digestion. The liver also takes ammonia, which is the product of metabolism of like nucleic acids and amino acids, which contain that amine group. And when you metabolize that, you produce ammonia. Ammonia is very toxic. It is extremely toxic. It destroys cells and does terrible stuff. So the liver takes ammonia, even the tiniest amounts of ammonia, and turns that ammonia into urea. Urea is less toxic. And then that urea travels in the blood to your kidneys, where it is excreted by your body, and you pee out the urea. That's the whole function of your kidneys, is to get rid of that urea. So the liver cleans blood of ammonia. It also the liver controls the amount of sugar, which is part of digestion as well. It controls the amount of sugar in your blood. Too much sugar in your blood can become toxic. It's bad for you. It kills cells. It attacks nerves, actually. So what the liver will do is the liver will convert sugar into glycogen. And remember, glycogen is the way animals store sugar, one of the ways the animals store sugar. So the liver will fill up with glycogen. Glycogen is stored in your muscles and a lot of it is in your liver. The liver will break down glycogen when you don't have enough sugar in your blood. When your cells are starved of blood, it will break down glycogen and raise your blood sugar level. Another thing the liver does is it just removes toxins, general toxins from your body. So if you drink a lot of alcohol, the liver will take the alcohol and remove it from your blood. The alcohol is toxic to your blood. Alcohol is carcinogenic. But it does a whole bunch of stuff to your nervous system, things like that. So the liver will break down that alcohol and remove it from your blood, as well as vitamins. People take vitamin blasts. They'll take a lot of vitamin C or a lot of whatever by health food store vitamins. In high amounts, these vitamins are toxic, so your liver will go, oh, there's too much vitamins, and it will break those vitamins down and take them out. You actually end up peeing a lot of them out. So when you do buy huge amounts of vitamins from the health food store and eat huge amounts of vitamins, you are paying to pee. Basically, that is what's going to happen to your money. You will urinate it into the toilet. If you eat healthy, you get enough vitamins. If you eat a balanced diet, you do not need to buy pills. And last, the liver produces blood proteins, which are important for maintaining blood pressure. So blood proteins are called globulins. We're going to be studying globulins when we do the circulatory system. So blood proteins are important for maintaining blood pressure and for blood clotting. So when you get a cut, to making sure that the cut, you don't continue bleeding. All right, so those are the functions of the liver. Aside, Rube, we need to know what the liver does. So for digestion, the liver produces bile, which is stored in the gall bladder. So then we had CCK be released, and a hormone be released from the duodenum, from those endocrine glands in the duodenum into the blood, and now that triggers the gallbladder to release bile into the duodenum. What does bile do? Bile mechanically, physically, not chemically. Bile doesn't do this chemically, it does this physically. Bile breaks down fats. Basically, it takes fats. Remember, fats are not soluble in water, and we've got a lot of water in that acid chyme. There's a lot of water. We've been secreting water in the mouth, in the stomach, and so those fats, they don't dissolve in water. Remember, that one of the superpowers of lipids is that they are insoluble in water. They're hydrophobic, so they form into these large lumps. Bile is able to get into those lumps in between the molecules and start breaking those lumps up into smaller lumps. That's what bile does. It's this goo that breaks large fats into smaller fats. Not chemically, doesn't break the bonds. It's not breaking any covalent bonds. It's physically making the fat droplets smaller. This is called emulsifying fats, breaking the droplets down, mechanically breaking down fats. It's called emulsifying fats. So the gallbladder stores bile. At the behest of CCK, it will release that bile into the duodenum, and that begins the mechanical digestion of fats by emulsifying the fats. So that's the gallbladder. And that's bile. You also can get stones in the gallbladder. Don't worry about it. So that's happening. Next is the pancreas. We got to talk about the pancreas. It's huge. So the pancreas is both an exocrine and an endocrine gland. The exocrine functions of the pancreas are to excrete pancreatic juice. So the chemoreceptors in the duodenum have triggered the pancreas to release pancreatic juice. What's in pancreatic juice? A whole bunch of stuff is in pancreatic juice, just like gastric juice. So pancreatic juice is full of enzymes that are there to digest biomolecules. So there's an enzyme for digesting proteins. There are nucleases. What else is there? Are lipases. There's pancreatic amylase for digesting carbohydrates. There is also water. Remember, for these hydrolysis reactions, we need water. And there is also bicarbonate. Bicarbonate ions. Bicarbonate ions look like this. BCO, I believe it's 3. Is that right? H. No, not B. What am I talking about? H. There's no BCO3 and minus. There we go. What bicarbonate does? You got a minus here. Remember, the stuff that came out of the stomach is acidic. It's got an H+. It's got these protons here that make the chyme acidic, acid chyme. What bicarbonate does is it's negative. This is positive. It attracts the negatives, and you get H2CO3. Basically, you are buffering the acid chyme and turning it from acid chyme into just chyme. So that's what the bicarbonate's role in pancreatic juices is, to remove the acidity from acid chyme and now turn it into chyme. Number one. In fact, the duodenum, as you move into the duodenum, is basic. So the stomach had a pH of around 2.5. I think that's what we said, 2.5. The duodenum, you can see the duodenum. The duodenum is 8.3. I want to say that. Somewhere it says around 8. So it's basic. And that's thanks to bicarbonate, okay, in the pancreatic juice. What else is in the pancreatic juice? The next thing that's in the pancreatic juice, so we said water's in pancreatic juice. The next thing that's in pancreatic juice is an enzyme for digesting proteins. Remember in the stomach, when we were talking about the stomach, there was pepsin that broke peptide bonds in the stomach. That's the only thing we digested in the stomach was proteins. Well, there is a enzyme for digesting proteins in the duodenum. Pepsin doesn't work here because pepsin works in a low pH environment. It doesn't work in the basic environment of the duodenum, so it's going to be denatured. More likely, it's going to be broken down. The enzyme that breaks down proteins in the duodenum is called trypsin. Now, just like pepsin, trypsin has a precursor called, remember pepsin's precursor was called pepsinogen? I bet you can't guess what trypsin's precursor is called. If you said trypsinogen, you are 100% correct. It is trypsinogen. Now, pepsinogen was turned into pepsin by the low pH environment, by the acidic environment of the stomach. So pepsinogen was denatured into pepsin in that way. Unfortunately, the basic environment of the duodenum is not basic enough to denature trypsinogen into trypsin, to activate trypsin. Remember, we don't want these proteases working too early because they will start eating the pancreas. The pancreas is made out of proteins. We don't want it to be eating the pancreas. So it has to go down the duct. Once it enters the duct, once it enters the duodenum, inside the duodenum is another enzyme called enterokinase. I love that name, enterokinase. Enterokinase, what it does, its role, its substrate is trypsinogen. And so it grabs trypsinogen and turns it into trypsin, activates trypsinogen and turns it into trypsin, and then trypsin can further digest those proteins that we started digesting in the stomach. And trypsin will break those proteins down farther and farther and farther, the polypeptide chains, into amino acids. So, trypsin. Next, what else is in pancreatic juice? The next thing that's in pancreatic juice is pancreatic amylase. Remember, up here in the mouth, we had salivary amylase, which took starches and started breaking them down into polysaccharides, maybe some disaccharides, but those long starches, those long polysaccharides, breaking them down, those you guys remember the name of those bonds. I don't. So glycolytic bonds, that's not right. That doesn't sound right. Salivary amylase works in a neutral environment. The pH here is 7, right? The mouth is very watery, and pH is 7. It's neutral. Pancreatic amylase works in a basic environment, which is the environment of the duodenum. Remember, salivary amylase got denatured in the stomach. So while we were starting to digest proteins in the stomach, we unfortunately stopped digesting carbohydrates because salivary amylase doesn't work in the acidic environment of the stomach. Now we got to continue digesting those carbohydrates, and we're going to do that in the duodenum with salivary, pancreatic amylase. And the difference, it has the same substrate as pancreatic amylase, but a different structure, different order of amino acids. It works in a more basic environment. The same thing for pepsin and trypsin. Pepsin, same substrate, which is peptide bonds or peptides, but different amino acid chains that work in an acidic environment. Trypsin has the same substrate but works in a basic environment. So we've got those things. What else is in pancreatic juice? Well, there are nucleases. We're not even going to name these. There's a general assortment of nucleases that take nucleotides, take DNA. We eat a certain amount of DNA. When you're eating an animal, when you're eating a plant, they have nucleuses. You bet they've got nucleuses, and there's DNA and maybe some RNA in there. And we have these nucleases, while they're not a major source of nutrient, but they're there, that will break those DNA molecules down into nucleotides and then actually break the nucleotides down further into a pentose sugar, a base, so adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine, uracil, and that phosphate group. That's what nucleotides are made from. And then we will take that stuff and recycle it, turn it into more nucleotides for us, or do whatever it is that we need to do, metabolize it. We can actually metabolize those things for energy. And finally, there are also lipases in the pancreatic juice. So the bile, the first thing that happens is that bile is mechanically breaking down those globs of fat into smaller globs of fat. And it's doing that so there's a greater surface area of globs of fat, and those lipases can get at those fatty acid chains and start breaking down those fatty acid chains, ripping them off the glycol molecules, those neutral fats, breaking down those neutral fats. That is basically everything that is in pancreatic juice. So now we have chyme. And all of that stuff has been secreted into the pancreas. Chyme is now basic. It is a collection. It is all these things are being broken down. Those enzymes are mixed with chyme, and all water is mixed in there. And now it's going to travel down through the duodenum and down. The duodenum is just the start of the small intestine, and it's going to travel down the small intestine. And here in the small intestine is where finally everything starts to enter the body. This is where it starts to enter the body. It hasn't entered the body yet. Remember, the digestive tract is outside of the body because it's open to the outside atmosphere. And so the inner lining of the small intestine has special structures called villi that absorb nutrients. Let's draw a villi. Let's see if we can draw one. So, the inside of the small intestine is lined with these kind of protrusions. You can see that. You can see that. You can see that. That looks good. At the center of a villi is a capillary, but not a capillary that you think of like a blood vessel. This is a lymphatic capillary, and we will learn about the lymph system when we learn about the circulatory system. The lymph system is sort of like the garbage, the alleyways. It's the not sexy part of the circulatory system. It's where garbage goes. And so it's kind of a fluidy, yucky kind of stuff. We don't talk about it very much. So there's a lymphatic capillary in here. What happens here is those fats that those lipases are breaking down are absorbed, and they go into the lymphatic system. Those fats, those triglyceride fats, those lipids. And what happens here, there are enzymes inside the villi. So actually this thing if we were to zoom in even more, there are microvilli all over this. So we really want to increase the surface area, and there are microvilli, and then they have a, they will continue on. So pretend this, you could even pretend this is a microvilli, because it'll be basically the same structure. It's like you're going in, you're entering. It's like Inception, if you've ever seen that movie, Inception. It came out too long ago now. You may not have seen it. I think of it as a new movie. So fats are absorbed, and so what happens is the fats here, there are enzymes in here that convert the fats into a more usable format. There's still lipids, there's still fats, so glycol and fatty acids, and they are absorbed into the lymphatic system. There's also lots and lots of blood vessels here that are right at the surface, and so and there are lots and lots of transport proteins all along here, all along the membrane of the microvilli. There are lots of proteins and lots of mitochondria. Lots and lots of mitochondria. And so these mitochondria produce ATP that powers the transport proteins. And so carbohydrates, those products of nucleic acids, those parts of the nucleotides, the amino acids, all of those things are transported by these transport proteins, whether they can be the channel proteins, because the concentration is going to be greater out here, but a lot of them are pumps that will grab and put all that stuff in and pull it into the circulatory system, and now it's entered your blood, and now it is in your body. So the whole the whole small intestine, all along the length of the small intestine, we've got lots and lots of these, endless amounts of these, to increase the surface area so that food is getting spread out there, so we don't leave anything behind. We are sucking, for the entire length of the small intestine, we are sucking those nutrients in, as much of it as we can, all of it we can, all the carbohydrates, all the lipids, all the amino acids, all the, what am I forgetting? The nucleotides, or the components of the nucleotides, all of that is being absorbed, and it takes up a lot of energy. Look, we've got a lot of mitochondria here, a lot of ATP, a lot of energy for you to digest stuff because you need all of that food. We don't want to let anything go to waste. You went to all that trouble to get that food and to eat that food, so you don't want anything to go to waste. Because you expended a lot of energy to get that food. Now, our modern humans, we don't expend a lot of energy. We call Uber Eats, and they bring us the food, and we can roll over to the door and suck the food up through a straw, basically. But our hunter-gatherer ancestors that we evolved, these pristine bodies, they had to work really hard to get the food. Okay, so the nutrients have made it into the body. A lot of the nutrients have. Now, the remainder of stuff now passes, the stuff that we have not absorbed, that we can't absorb. So there's going to be like cellulose and just, kind of waste stuff, is now passing into the large intestine. And what is the large intestine for? Well, kind of two things happen in the large intestine. The main role of the large intestine, so the colon, as it's otherwise known. So there's the small intestine here in the center. It's the long one. It's all coiled up. The small intestine is the long one. The large intestine just sits here. There it is. There's the small intestine is connected to the large intestines. Let me just... by the procoaxial valve. Don't worry about it. And there we go. There's the small intestine, and things go into the large intestine. What happens in the large intestine is water is reabsorbed. Your body doesn't like to waste water. So what it does is the entire length of this colon, it is sucking water out of the chyme that is left over. All the nutrients have been sucked out in the small intestine, and we're only taking in water. We want that water back because we use that water, baby. We use it for everything. It's in our blood. It is in the digestive fluids here to help digestion, help those hydrolytic enzymes. It is lubricating our joints. It is doing all those things. So we are sucking the water in the large intestine. Some things of note. In the large intestine, notice this little protrusion, this little finger here. That's called the appendix. And notice it goes the wrong way. We want stuff to go this way. The appendix goes this way. The appendix is a vestigial organ. People still aren't 100% sure what the appendix does, but the theory is, because in some other mammals, the appendix contains enzymes that help digest cellulose. Remember, cellulose is another polysaccharide that makes the structure of plants. It is responsible for plant structure. We don't need to break those things down. We're not cows. It's too hard to break that stuff down. We're not cows. We don't need to do that, but we still have the little thing. We don't even make those enzymes. We don't do those enzymes. Why don't we need to? Because we eat the frickin' cows. They break down the cellulose. They turn it into stuff. We eat their meat. That's what we do. So we don't need it, but we still have this vestigial organ there. At some point in our history, in our evolutionary history, we did. We didn't eat the cows as well. Before, we didn't eat as much meat. We didn't know how to cook meat. So what can happen is food can enter here and plug this and irritate the lining of it and scratch the lining of it. And then what happens is it gets infected. And it gets infected here, it swells, things can't move along, a big immune system, and it actually swells to the point where it bursts. Now remember, this whole tube is sealed up, and the reason it's sealed up because it contains a lot of bad stuff. It contains bacteria, it contains hydrolytic enzymes, things like that. You don't want those things inside the rest of your body, in the areas it can't go, in the viscera of your body. So if the appendix bursts, it's a 911 emergency. You don't have a lot of pain sensors here, so sometimes people don't know that their appendix is inflamed. Usually it's just signs of a fever and general illness is what happens when you know. Mr. K was in a play at the Arts Club Theater doing It's a Wonderful Life, and Bob Fraser, the guy who was playing the guy whose life it was wonderful, I had just some small part. He was feeling ill, and sort of for a week, he was feeling ill, and then finally, before a show, he collapsed. Turns out he had appendicitis, an inflamed appendix, so the show had to be canceled. Someone else, an understudy, had to be brought in. Someone who had done the show before brought in to do the show. It was not me. I did not get to take over the lead role of the show. He was okay. Bob Fraser was okay. He returned to do the show again. So that's the appendix. Yes, you suck out all the water, and then you're left with a solid mass, a stinky, disgusting solid mass called poo, and you poo it out. There's your rectum here. That's the last part of the large intestine, and you poo it out, and it goes away from your body, and you have turned food into poo. The other thing that is inside your large intestine are bacteria. And what bacteria do is you don't digest 100% of everything. So there's still some stuff left over. And those bacteria will digest the things that you can't digest or haven't digested. And they get all really excited. And then we're in a symbiotic relationship with them because we provide them with these nutrients. And what they do is they convert those nutrients into more amino acids and minerals, some vitamins. They will actually turn the food into vitamins. That's why you don't need to take vitamin supplements, because those bacteria are doing it for you. They're making vitamins for you. They're making just enough vitamins for you. And so some minerals, also other minerals that your body uses, the bacteria. So there's minerals, vitamins, and some amino acids that the bacteria will produce, and you will absorb along with the water that you're absorbing in the large intestine. So, wow, that is a lot. One thing I didn't talk about, last thing that I didn't talk about. The pancreas also has endocrine glands, and those endocrine glands excrete insulin and glucagon. These are protein-based hormones. They react to the amount of food that you've eaten, like CCK, secretin will trigger insulin to come out. And basically what those do is like I talked about, glucose in the blood, too much glucose is bad. Not enough glucose is bad because your cells need glucose. And the insulin and glucagon, what they do is they help regulate blood sugar levels. What insulin does is it reduces blood sugar levels. So what it does is, it triggers integral proteins in cell membranes to absorb sugar, to take sugar in. It also tells your liver to convert sugar into glycogen. So that's the role of insulin. So as a result, your liver turns it into glycogen and your cells start to absorb the sugar. Therefore, there is less sugar in your blood. Glucagon, right? I'm saying that, glucagon. I feel like glucagon, is that where glucagon sounds like some kind of product? Glucagon. No, it is. It's a glucagon. Glucagon, what it does the reverse. Glucagon basically tells your liver to take glycogen, break it down into glucose, and send it out into the blood. So that is the endocrine function of the pancreas. A terribly long video, but that's it. There's just 2 for this unit. So there you go. Let's do one big summary. Okay, so we're gonna, on one last summary. You can stop the video now if you're like, I don't want any more. But so how it all starts, you have food enter your mouth. Here you've got mechanical digestion, you're chewing, crunching the food with your teeth, and you have chemical digestion of starch. The starch is digested by the saliva, which is an exocrine gland. Exocrine glands, the salivary glands, have secreted saliva, which contains salivary amylase. It should say somewhere here salivary amylase. Then that goes to your pharynx. That food slides down your tongue. Your tongue also actually is involved in mechanical digestion. Your tongue is a very strong muscle, so it's crunching the food as well. It goes to the back of your throat where the pharynx is, where all the tubes meet, and the pharynx, the muscles around the pharynx contract, and that pushes the food, which is now called a food bolus, because it's been chewed, it's been mixed with water, as the carbohydrates are being digested, into the esophagus. Peristalsis pushes the food bolus down to the cardiac sphincter, which opens and lets the food bolus into the stomach. In the stomach, don't focus on me, you silly thing, focus on the food bolus. Don't focus on my reflection. It's focusing on my reflection. The food, there we go, if I bring it closer. The food bolus stretches the inside of the stomach, which triggers stretch receptors, which triggers endocrine glands called G cells to secrete gastrin, a hormone gastrin. That gastrin travels through the blood right back to the stomach again, and different cells in the stomach called gastric glands, these are exocrine glands, they secrete gastric juice, which contains water, hydrochloric acid, and the precursor to pepsin called trypsinogen. The hydrochloric acid, the acidic environment of the stomach converts pepsinogen, denatures pepsinogen into pepsin. And in your stomach now, salivary amylase is made inert, it's made denatured, and pepsin is starting to break down peptide bonds and starting to digest proteins in your stomach. Your stomach stores this food and continues breaking down those peptides. While the food is in there, it's waiting to pass it's turned into acid chyme, and it's waiting to pass through the pyloric sphincter. There's a sphincter for you. A little bit of acid chyme passes from the pyloric system into the duodenum, or duodenum, which I like saying. It's acidic, so it triggers chemoreceptors in the lining of, this is the beginning of the small intestine, in the lining of the duodenum. These chemoreceptors trigger endocrine glands in the duodenum that secrete the hormones CCK and secretin, which travels through the blood to 2 organs, the Gall Bladder, which is attached to the liver and full of bile, which was made in the liver, and the pancreas, which sits above the duodenum, And the CCK and secretin triggers the pancreas to secrete insulin and to secrete pancreatic juice. So the pancreas is both a endocrine gland and an exocrine gland. Also, the CCK has triggered the secretion of bile from the gallbladder. Bile is emulsifying the fats in the acid chyme, which is now turning into chyme because there is also bicarbonate in the pancreatic juice, which is neutralizing the acid and turning the acid chyme into chyme. In the pancreatic juice is water, trypsinogen, pancreatic amylase, nucleases, and lipases. These are now the trypsinogen, which is a protease. It breaks down proteins, is converted into trypsin by enterokinase, which is in the duodenum, another enzyme. And now all of these guys are breaking down, continuing the breakdown of carbohydrates and continuing the breakdown of proteins and beginning the breakdown of lipids and beginning the breakdown of nucleic acids. All of those biomolecules are being broken down now in the duodenum, and as this chyme continues down the small intestine, they are being absorbed by special structures, by these special, the inside of the small intestine has these villi, which the villi themselves have special cells which have microvilli, these even tinier protrusions. And the microvilli contain a lacteal and lots of blood vessels, capillaries, and lots of proteins that transport these biomolecules into the blood vessels, and lots of mitochondria for energy for these transport proteins, and enzymes that convert the fatty acids into sort of more convenient form. They get absorbed into the lymph, and the rest of the guys go into the blood, and now you have absorbed the food that you have eaten. It has entered your body in the small intestine. Continuing on, the stuff that's left over passes the ileocacal valve into the lower intestine or the large intestine. Hopefully it doesn't inflame the appendix. Ignore the appendix, there's nothing there. Water in the large intestine is absorbed all the remaining water, all that water that we secreted is absorbed back. The chyme is now becoming feces. There's also bacteria in here that's digesting anything that we left behind, turning it into minerals and amino acids, that's some extra amino acids, and nutrients. Vitamins. So those are being absorbed. And finally, the food collects in your rectum. It is held in by your anal sphincter. And when you're ready to poo, you poo. It goes into the toilet, into the plumbum, and out to the ocean, I guess, essentially. If you live in Victoria, it goes directly into the ocean. If you live in Vancouver and most other cities, it goes through a processing plant and goes to the garbage dump, actually, I think a lot of the stuff, or is used for fertilizer and things like that. That is the journey of food through your digestive system. I know this is a terribly long video, but there you go. Next time, well, we're done with digestion here. Cheers.